Welcome to the Disrupt Your Career podcast, brought to you by Claire Harbour
and Antoine Tirard. We're passionate about helping everyone find fulfillment in their work life.
We believe that big, messy, uncharted career changes are inevitable, and it's up to you to decide.
Will you take control and disrupt, or allow yourself to be disrupted?
We wrote the book about it, and now we share here our conversations with other thinkers in this crucial area.
Settle down and get ready to listen to this dose of wisdom.
So in this episode of the Disrupt Your Career podcast, I'm delighted to be welcoming Michael Stanford, better known as Mike. He is the founder and the managing director of Summit Leadership. He's calling me from the mountains in Switzerland. There's bound to be a link. And he is the former head of transformational leadership practice of EMEA at Korn Ferry. He's the author of Leadership Transition: How Leaders Turn Chaos into Growth, where he applies post-traumatic growth research to help leaders thrive in disruptive times. And boy, we are in disruptive times. So Mike, thank you so much for joining me. It's a real pleasure to have you with me today.
It's a great pleasure for me to be here as well, Claire. Thanks for the invitation.
Wonderful. Let's go straight into it. With the beginning of your career, you founded Summit Leadership as an icing on the cake, almost, after very senior roles, including leading transformational leadership at Korn Ferry for the EMEA region. That's not where you started, but tell us about the trajectory that you've taken since you even began thinking about what you would do as work. Was it by design or serendipity? And what have been the moments of greatest pride or toughest challenges along the way of your career?
What a great question. And you may hear a little bit of a smile in my voice. It's a mix of serendipity and some design. When you asked me my earliest thoughts about what I would be doing with my life, probably I was 10 years old, imagining I'd be a marine biologist. I don't know why, but I thought scuba diving was involved and that would be cool. But in my, let's say, more adult career, I sort of stumbled into the arena of leadership development. And that was very serendipitous. So I'm Canadian-Swiss by background, Canadian originally, and had finished an economics degree in Canada and then an MBA in Canada. And by the time I had finished my MBA, I'd been living in Canada for a chunk of time, maybe about 10 years. My father was a diplomat for the Canadian government. We moved around a lot, and so I was used to moving around every few years. And by the time I finished the MBA in Canada, I was getting a little bit restless to get out of the country for a while.
10 years is a lifetime.
10 years felt like a lifetime when you're used to moving every 3.5, 4 years.
Absolutely.
So I had an opportunity to take a job at a very young business school in Switzerland. That business school had a good connection with the school where I did my MBA. And so I came over to do some research work at this business school, mainly because it allowed me to get out of the country, do some things I was interested in doing, explore organizational life. But I had no intention of staying in Switzerland beyond a year or two. And now we're 34 years later. So I ended up being really interested from the business school perspective, working with all these companies doing interesting things, some succeeding, some failing, some leaders succeeding and failing. I became really interested in this idea of how do we help leaders do what they need to do to help their organizations do the right thing for the world, for the company, for the shareholders, for the employees as well. How do we help them to do that when there seem to be so many forces arranged against doing that? It's very hard to do. And I was really interested in the proposition of what it would really take for an organization to help leaders the way I felt they needed to be helped. And so I spent a couple of decades in the business school world, not as an academic, but as part of a small group of people who were running the business school as if it were a professional services company. I ran one or two of the businesses within that organization. I did that for a long time, and there was no shortage in variety of what companies were doing and how we tried to help. That was all serendipity, sort of stumbling into an area, a career area that I hadn't really thought of. But once I was in it, I found it to be really, really interesting. The design part, I think, came after a fair amount of time in that, let's call it the business school world, having observed what I thought was helpful and not so helpful, and having started a PhD on leadership transitions, senior leadership transitions. Then the design aspect of career management started to kick in. So I left the business school, joined Korn Ferry, and I did a couple of things. One of the things I did within Korn Ferry is I got engaged in Korn Ferry's quite robust senior leadership transitions practice. And I spent a lot of time, in part, sort of following the Korn Ferry process for helping senior executives go through transitions, but also bringing my research, as my research was unfolding, bringing that into the practice. And so that became a very much more by design, I think, simply because I had a much clearer idea of how I thought I could help the world.
And you'd entered a large platform that had the sort of scope to let you explore and bring that, right?
Exactly. Korn Ferry is a global organization, no lack of clients with which it has great connections, no lack of opportunities to get involved in leadership development. And the leadership development crew at Korn Ferry was, and as far as I know, still is, outstanding.
Some big names there, which we won't dig into today, but definitely some very big leadership people. So yes, indeed. Of course, you're one of them. So many years getting to play in the best way with your ideas, your thinking, your client work, and to observe what plays out in leadership in that place. How many years were you at Korn Ferry in the end?
5 years at Korn Ferry, just over 5 years, and then launched my own practice, Summit Leadership, that you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast.
So from curious, rather serendipitous academia and business education into a stronghold of thought leadership, and then back out into the independent world to pursue the loftiest of your lofty ideas. What has been the transitions that have been impactful and potentially difficult in terms of your own personal and leadership identity? And how have you managed to shape and reshape those as you've gone through the different transitions?
That's a really interesting question. And I'd say the most difficult, and probably for exactly that reason, the richest transition I went through was the transition out of the business school world and into a different course for my PhD work and into the Korn Ferry world. And the reason I think that was particularly challenging is, as I started to view the business school world as slightly too limited for the kind of work I wanted to do, I also had to think of myself as not just a leader sort of building a business, but a leader with some ideas that I felt strongly needed to be out into the marketplace. Ideas about senior leadership, ideas about leadership in general, and leadership transitions and how transitions can be both challenging and very rich areas for growth. So I left the business school world that I'd spent enough time in to feel very comfortable in it, to have a sense of mastery of it, kind of. And I realized, as some ideas and thoughts were emerging in the research, that in order to do what I think needed to be done with these ideas in this research, I needed to really rethink my role. I really needed to rethink the work I did, being a little bit more in the spotlight, being much more involved in delivery and working directly with leaders rather than helping others do that. And it was a real challenge to sort out whether or not I was up to the task of doing what I thought needed to be done with the material. That sense of purpose of being able to bring the material to the world, though, as a good sense of purpose tends to do, gave me the energy to take on all the things I needed to take on to do what I do now. It was really, really challenging. More than once, late on a Friday night after a hard week of work, I would ask myself, do you really want to put yourself through all this pain and agony? Isn't there something more comfortable you could be doing? And of course, the answer was always, maybe it's more comfortable, but it's less meaningful and maybe better to go in the direction of meaning rather than comfort. The identity shift was sort of a byproduct of other things. And the other things were me taking from the post-trauma growth literature, me examining and exploring some core narratives, some core ways I had of thinking about myself, core ways of thinking about the world and how the world works and what I could bring to the world. And as I explored how I held those narratives in the past, and in exploring them, how they changed, with those changes came, let's say, identity shifts in who I thought I was and what I thought I could do.
Very interesting. So you used that learning. It's almost like you used the study of those post-traumatic methods and narratives to generate a new way of being, but it was based on structure and theory as well as shift in mindset and behaviors. An interesting mix.
You mentioned earlier that the work I do in leadership transitions is informed by clinical research in post-traumatic growth, which is very, very true. In my doctoral work, I included other fields of psychology and their points of view on life transitions, but post-traumatic growth held a particularly important position, I think, in the doctoral work and also in my practice, including in my own experience. As I was going through the doctoral research, I was also in a position in my business school work. I was in a very senior role in the organization I was in, and I had been asked as senior staff member in the organization to take on some really, really difficult challenges, and I was finding those challenges very unsettling. And finding those challenges unsettling, I, in the course of my research, talked to a lot of other executives working in all sorts of companies who described their transitional work in leadership in their companies, not in terms of the tactics of transition. You need to know who your stakeholders are, you need early wins, not in those terms, but rather in quite deep psychological terms, even in the terms of trauma. So they would tell me stories, Mike, I've tried to take on this new role and I'm discovering things and I have no confidence in my ability to understand how this is all working, and I have no confidence in myself. Or I've taken on a role and promises have been made, and this is a true example. I became unexpectedly pregnant and all of a sudden my organization is treating me in a different way. And how do I make sense of that? And one person I talked to described her experience of a transition as a torture of the soul.
Wow.
A torture of the soul.
Yeah.
Wow. And that's exactly how I reacted. I thought, shouldn't you be able to have good tactical strategies for doing the 9 or 10 things you need to do to get through a transition? And yet so many leaders I talked to, and my own experience was,
Indeed.
these transitions can reach much deeper into who you are than tactics can address. And that's how I turned to the post-traumatic growth work.
Beautiful. I mean, it feels almost like we're in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. We're talking about the problems in leadership transitions that you're interested in, the interest in which was generated by your problems in leadership. It's like how many layers of mirrors can we find here? But it's very resonant, and I'm sure that many will empathize with that image of torture of the soul. Let's turn that now towards what you're most motivated to be working on and solving right now in terms of leadership transition problems, challenges, whatever we want to call them. And I know that you're going to go back to telling us that it's post-traumatic growth and so on, but tell us a little bit more about how and why this work, which goes in the direction of it's not a checklist, it's a lot deeper. Why this particular direction to get beyond the checklist, the strategy, the toolbox?
I remember early in the research, I think I was still in the business school world, but I was on my way out of it, I think. At the time, I was on the board of a couple of industry bodies, and so I'd go to industry conferences quite often. I remember at one conference, the head of leadership development for a large global FMCG was giving a presentation on a new program let's say, a new experience he was pulling together to support senior executives in that company. And the story he told was this. He said, we appoint these senior executives into ever more complex roles. Often they fail, and often they fail catastrophically. The chaos and complexity of the role is too much for them to bear, and we don't support them. And we don't support them because we have a huge lineup of leaders who are eager to be promoted into senior roles, and the company can recover from most of these failures, but the people can't. So his point of view was, we really need to do more to help senior executives step into those extraordinarily chaotic and complex roles. And I think for me, that's been a good way of framing the kind of work I like to do. It's not just for senior executives, because transitions at every level can be very chaotic. Senior executive transitions tend to come with a peculiar form of chaos. I think that's really what I like to do, what I try to do in my practice, informed by the doctoral work. But the doctoral work was also a very pragmatic applied research program. So it was not sort of lost in the clouds of ideas. It was really, how do these ideas work in action? And what does the action look like? What I find very often is the leaders we work with are having a hard time understanding why they are so off balance by their transitions, especially when they've taken on the checklist, sort of the tactical checklist. They've done all the right tactics according to all the work that's been done on the tactics of transition, and it's not working. And often it's not working because they discovered to their dismay that some assumptions they've made, fundamental assumptions, have been shattered by their experience of transition. An assumption like, I assume that the strengths I've had in my leadership will be enough to carry me into my new role.
Indeed. But your ear will not get you there.
Yeah, that's an easy one to get beyond. The more difficult ones to get beyond are things like, I assumed my boss would be supportive. Now I'm not so sure. Or I assumed the board would want me to be successful. This isn't clear to me anymore. I assumed that I knew what was expected of me, and now I'm not really sure whose expectations I should be paying attention to or what those people might expect. And so they assume they're going into roles where some minimal clarity will help guide them, and it doesn't. And that, to me, reaches deeper than the tactics.
It's fascinating. And we want to hear from the authority what it is that is not just making transitions derail. I think you've given some really strong and compelling arguments as to what those might be. Let's flip it and start thinking about what actually helps leaders stabilize fast once they're in the midst of this torturous, soulful chaos and massive lack of clarity. What are the aspects that tend to help leaders stabilize?
What I find helps most, and it can be done relatively quickly, but not in an hour. It takes weeks rather than days. The fastest thing you can do as a leader going into a transition, or the most helpful thing you can do, is to understand yourself really, really well. And that sounds both obvious and so vague that it's meaningless, but the post-traumatic growth research is crystal clear on what it means to understand yourself in a helpful way. And in the post-traumatic growth work, they talk about the importance of narratives. Trauma is described as an experience or event where a core narrative, a way of believing about how the world works or how you should work in the world, a core narrative is destroyed. And you're lost without the guidance mechanism, the navigation mechanisms you used in life. Those are destroyed now, and so it's very difficult to get your bearings. In the post-traumatic growth work, there are a couple of things that are really, really helpful. One is the work tends to focus on 4 inner narratives, the 4 most important inner narratives for you to have a good, solid sense of who you are. And the reason we focus on this idea of knowing yourself, there's a great quotation by Carl Jung that I'll paraphrase. It's a lot easier to manage the chaos outside of you once you've taken care of the chaos inside of you.
Brilliant.
A good definition of leadership for me is you're responsible for shaping the chaos outside of you. And so to do that, you benefit greatly from a good sense of knowing yourself. In the post-traumatic growth work, there are 4 narratives. There's the narrative of your sense of purpose. So what gives you meaning in your life or in your work? There's the narrative of your root system. What are your core beliefs, your core values, the things you can't compromise? They're essential to you. What is the narrative of your relationships? In our leadership work, we usually focus on 3 relationships. Your relationship with your secure bases, the people who secure you, your relationship with the company, and the extent to which that's a balanced adult-to-adult relationship, and your relationship with yourself. What's the quality of your relationship with yourself? And the 4th narrative is your resources, the narrative of the things in you that enable you to make a difference in the world around you. So you're not a victim of it, but you can exercise agency over it. We find that if you can immediately start to work on clear narratives in those 4, we organize them as compass points. So those 4 compass points, the sharper and more deeply explored those narratives are, the much stronger we are in the face of the currents and storms around us. We get quickly into what's the state of your compass and how can we make it stronger.
So let's talk about how this navigation system, the compass with the 4 narratives, might look in the early stages of a substantial career transition, for example. What are the most powerfully translatable elements into leadership behaviors, and what might it look like in the first 3 or 4 months, or to use the leadership parlance, the first 90 to 180 days? What should we be looking out for? What might the listeners find, I'm not going to say easy to grasp onto, because none of this stuff is easy, but what's going to get them juiced up about taking this approach? And then, of course, want to buy your book, because we want them to buy your book too. But please share some, if I may call them such, easy tips in terms of using this compass in those stages.
In the early days, there are a few steps into those narratives that are both pretty engaging and relatively easy to dive into. And let me talk about 3 of them. So one of them is, how are you thinking about your purpose? It's an open question, but we find often the response we get from leaders is, well, my purpose is, I'm going to exaggerate here a little bit, but my purpose is to do what I'm told, or my purpose is to please the senior executives, or my purpose is to meet my KPIs. And all of that's fine, but on your tombstone, you want something beyond, I met my KPI. This is usually an area, it's the north point of the compass. It's usually an area where, with a little bit of thought, you can get beyond the KPIs. You can get to very quickly, what is the difference I want to make with the people around me because I'm there? How do I want them to be better or different because I'm there? And that starts to open up a world of, I'm not just here to do what I'm told. I'm not just here to fit KPIs. I'm here to have an influence on how people behave and how they see themselves and what they can contribute. So that's usually a good first step into it. We often use metaphorical language when we ask people to think about their purpose. A Marvel character or something from mythology, or Disney is often really good at this, that is a good representation of you as the leader you would like to be, and why that character, and unwrap why that character. A second good entry, which is not too difficult, is what's your relationship with the company? Here we're getting into the relationship narrative. What's your relationship with the company? It's the parent-child, adult-to-adult, transactional analysis theory. And am I viewing the organization I work within as a demanding parent, and I'm sort of the child that needs to please the demanding parent? which is really often the case and is not necessarily a bad thing, although it can become quite risky the longer you're in a place and the more experienced you become? Or do I view my relationship with the organization as a negotiated adult to adult relationship where I give things to the organization and they give to me? The organization demands things of me, and I also demand things from the organization. It's really interesting, Claire, how you can almost see in discussions with some senior executives a switch click in them when they start to imagine, what if my relationship with this company that I've been trying to please is actually, no, I can make demands of it too. And so I will. The third narrative, a really easy narrative, and one we put last because it's important that we remember this about ourselves, is the narrative of our strengths. What is it that you bring into the world, including the world of your leadership, that enables you to make a difference? And the reason we spend good time on this is it's usually fairly easy to remember. We get feedback all the time. We can draw from that feedback. It's also something that tends to take a hit when we're in a difficult, chaotic transition. We tend to forget that we've got agency. We've got muscles. We've built muscles. There's every reason to believe those muscles will serve us well. We may need to build more, but they'll serve us well. Let's not lose complete confidence in our ability to make a difference.
Absolutely. I love that. And you're taking some very clear and easy, at least to start applying, techniques to what is, by background, complex and heady stuff intellectually and academically. So thank you for making it so digestible and turning it into some steps that any leader in a new and chaotic situation could start to adopt and feel better and do better and be better. That's wonderful. I wonder if you would be willing to share with us a concrete case. I mean, obviously you can't tell us names, you can't tell us company details, but could you take us through a case study of somebody's big transition, what sort of chaos was torturing his or her soul, and how you put this thinking and the interventions into use and what changed for that person?
I'm happy to, and it will be well disguised, of course. But it's an example of this idea of the power of reframing one of your narratives. In this case, I mentioned this idea of reframing the quality of your relationship with the company you work within. And so the importance of that adult to adult relationship. I'll tell a quick story about exactly that. So it's a leader who joined a financial services organization in a very important role. He came in from the outside, from a competitor, in a very important role, and he took over a team that had been in place for a long time and had had a certain style of leadership for a long time. He came in with a couple of things: really, really incredible technical expertise. He also came in as a quite playful personality. He has a quite playful personality. There's a little bit of a trickster in him. He does serious work. He works very, very hard. He expresses himself very, very well, and yet there's a little playfulness in him. He takes over this team, and as often happens within this team, some people are uncomfortable. It's a new leader. That's a transition for the team. He managed the transition with most of those team members really, really well, but there were a couple of people within the team who were not so comfortable with a shift in leadership styles, including one who was uncomfortable enough, or let's say more interested in managing a good exit from the team than making her continued participation in the team. And so she made some accusations against this new leader. And a couple of things happened. So she made the accusations. The accusations were at the same time really destabilizing for this new leader because he was being accused of doing things that were absolutely contrary to his deepest beliefs and values. That happened. And at the same time, the organization responded as if the accusations were true. And so without the leader being able to do much by way of defense, this person who made the accusations was given a reasonably good settlement. She left the organization, and this leader had some symbolic, but in some ways still very significant punishments for the accusations that were made against him. This was fundamentally destabilizing experience for this leader.
Without any doubt.
I was engaged with him for the transition into this leadership role before these events happened. They happened in the course of our work together. And our work together became very quickly focused on, how the hell do I make sense of this? How do I continue to operate in this organization that doesn't defend me, that assumes I'm guilty, or at least behaves as if I'm guilty, maybe for political reasons, but it still behaves as if I'm guilty? How do I make sense of this? Do I want to stay here or not? And if I do stay, under what circumstances would my staying in the organization make sense? And that's when we dived into, well, let's take a look at how you're viewing your relationship with the organization. What is the organization to you, and what does that mean for how you're behaving towards it? And we very quickly got to an unconscious but important belief that, well, I'm new in this organization, I have an important role, I better make people within the company, especially the company's leadership, happy. I mean, that's a good assumption to have. Yes, we do need to make the companies we work within happy, but that's not a one-way street. So we talked about, what would an adult-to-adult relationship with this organization look like? And can you engage with your boss and the senior leaders in a way that makes you feel more as if your relationship with them is adult to adult, so that you're not at risk of compromising anything essential to yourself? He conducted a series of meetings and conversations with leadership in the organization that reflected a reframing of, I need to serve this organization as if I'm a child-pleasing, a needy parent, or to, look, you have demands of me, I get that, you pay me, so you get to have demands of me. I've also got options, and I have demands to make of you, and these are the demands. And out of that came good negotiations around how his ongoing engagement within the organization should work. And they were good conversations. They came to a good outcome, and he's still within the organization, still as vibrant and as enthusiastic and energetic as ever, in part because he works within an organization that he can treat as an adult, and that treats him as an adult.
That's fascinating. I think the listeners will really enjoy that story, and I did too. It also brings us to the thorny question of, what organizations, whether that's the board, whether that's the leadership, but we know the report card around how they manage a new entrant or new transitioning leaders onboarding will generally be reading something in the way of could do better, right? So when we think about what these different entities and stakeholders within an organization typically over or under engineer in onboarding, what would be a simple high leverage transition playbook actually look like?
There tends to be under engineering rather than over engineering. If there's an over engineering, it's usually over engineering on the tactical and under engineering on the deeper work. So for a board or head of human resources, or for leaders whose people are coming into more senior roles, there are probably three things to pay attention to from the start, to pay attention to. Paying attention to these things can even start as you're considering the person for the role.
Indeed.
The first is, make it clear what your expectations are. Make it clear what your expectations are for not only for performance of this transitioning leader, but also of the impact that that leader should have on the organization around them. Let's say there's a performance impact, there's a cultural impact as well. There's also an organizational capability impact. Try to be as clear as possible about what the expectations are. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One is, clarity is an ordering mechanism. The clearer we are on the expectations we have of our leaders, the less they feel they're operating in chaos, the less they feel they're operating in uncertainty. And what I'm not saying is be clear on your expectations so that the leader meets all of those expectations. What I am saying is be clear on your expectations so that you give the leader a chance to understand which of those expectations she wants to meet and which of those expectations she might want to subvert or push back against, which is really important, particularly for senior leaders. I'd say the second thing to do, which you can also do from the beginning, is to provide support. The best feedback we have on leaders is when the people around them tell us, that leader stretches me beyond what I think I'm capable of doing, but I know she has my back. And it's the I know she has my back that's really important. The role itself will give all sorts of demands to the person, will stretch the leader in all sorts of ways. It's really critical that boards, senior leaders, really important that they give a sense of, we're here if you need us. We'll challenge you, we'll stretch you, and we're here if you need us. A little bit of guidance and encouragement and being present for those leaders goes an awful long way. And the third thing, which may be the most difficult thing, let the leader wear their own suit. I'm stealing a phrase from Gilles Andrier. Gilles Andrier is the CEO of Givaudan. Givaudan is one of the world's most amazing fragrances and flavors companies. And in our work with the senior leaders at Givaudan, Gilles was talking to the group about how important it is to wear your own suit. And by that, he meant how important it is to understand the fundamentals of the role and what you need to achieve in the role, but also that the role needs to reflect what's essential to you. And so you need to be able to bring a unique set of your strengths and your values and your beliefs and your sense of the difference you want to make in the organization. You need to be pretty clear on what that is. And that takes time to get clear on it. But that idea for a board or line manager or human resources to let leaders figure out in the role what their suit is, how they're going to make the role their own, it gives a wonderful sense of support and freedom to the leader.
That's a gorgeous image. I'm very glad that you shared that with us. Yeah, I'm sure there will be many, many little imaginations buzzing right now, looking at whatever their version of leaders in their own suits look like. But that's fantastic. Thank you. I sense we could go on for hours with these kinds of anecdotes and thinkings, but I suspect we need to start closing. So there's one question I always try to ask, which is to get you to go back to your 18-year-old or thereabouts self, and what sort of advice you would want to give him about handling disruptive transitions.
Oh la la, what a beautiful question. So I promise to keep my response short because I think you're right. My response to this question could go for far longer than anyone but myself would be interested in. So here's what I'd say. If I were to give advice to my 18-year-old self, I'd say probably 4 things. I'd say have fun. Hold the transitions in your life lightly. They don't all have to be sort of dark and deep. They can all be opportunities for you to learn about yourself, and learning about yourself can be a light and fun exercise. I'd also say be patient. We're all of us works in progress, and thank God for that. Life and leadership are both a laboratory for learning about ourselves. And so be patient with the wisdom that we can extract from our experiences in life. These last 2 are specific to me and who I was at 18 years old. My last 2 are know who you are and be careful not to compromise what's essential to you. And at 18 years old, I remember we'd moved around a lot. And as a kid moving around a lot, going into new schools all the time, there was a reflex of who do I need to be to get accepted into this new group of people? How do I earn a sense of belonging into this new place? And so a reflex of how do I shape myself to be acceptable rather than I'm going to be who I essentially am, and maybe the world around me will need to shape itself according to who that is. Know what's essential to you and don't compromise on things that you shouldn't compromise on. And I'm quite sure that if my current self told my 18-year-old self all of these things, I would have sort of nodded politely and, gone on with whatever I was doing, because this counsel or whatever wisdom is in that message feels to me maybe better suited to a 40-year-old than an 18-year-old.
I was going to say it's beautiful advice for any of us listening too. I was also thinking that if you had been the 18-year-old receiving that advice from older, wise Mike, you'd probably have turned into some sort of god by now and become superhumanly amazing and accomplished on every front, and not the imperfect, unfinished, but beautiful human that you are, right? And that most of us are. So I love that perspective. Thank you so much. Mike, we need to stop. It's been an absolute pleasure. We've gone from little wry laughter through to really deep and important chaos and torture of the soul. It's been an absolute ride, and I'm very, very glad that you spent time sharing this with us. I know that many of the leaders are going to want to buy your book. We always include those details in the notes to the podcast. So thank you so much for being here with me today.
With great pleasure, Claire. Thank you again. Thank you so much for inviting me in to share some stories about some issues or challenges in life that I think are quite meaningful and quite important.
They really are. They're crucial to us all. And let me underline, for those who might be younger or less senior watching, you don't have to be becoming a CEO to take any of this into account. It could be something as apparently insignificant as changing school, changing country, changing city.
I'm really grateful you said that, Claire. One of the most important bits of feedback I've had about the book is, Mike, I'm not sure this is really a book for leaders. I think it's a book for life. And I think there's some truth to that.
Thank you for sharing your book for life with us, Michael.
Thank you, Claire.
We hope you enjoyed hearing from this month's guest as much as we did.
Do go and check out our work on disrupt-your-career.com and come back soon. Thank you.